The boy stood alone behind the curtain, his hands trembling so badly he had to press them against his legs just to keep them still. The stage lights leaked through the gap in the fabric like a warning. Every sound from the audience felt louder than it should have been. Laughter, coughs, someone dropping a bottle. Somewhere out there, thousands of eyes waited for something impressive, something entertaining, something worth their time. And he knew, deep down, that he looked like none of that. His name was Elias, and he had never spoken a single word in his life. Not because he didn't want to. Not because he didn't have thoughts or feelings. But because his voice had been taken from him before he even understood what a voice was. Doctors had called it a rare neurological condition. Teachers had called it a limitation. Kids at school had called it something much worse. Mute, broken, useless. Elias learned early that silence made people uncomfortable. When he couldn't answer questions, they assumed he was stupid. When he didn't laugh at jokes, they assumed he was cold. When he tried to communicate with gestures, people grew impatient. Silence, he learned, made you invisible. But music was different. Music never asked him to explain himself. It never demanded words. When Elias was 7, he found an old, cracked piano in the corner of a community center that smelled like dust and regret. One key was missing, several were out of tune. But when he pressed his fingers down, something inside his chest loosened for the first time in his life. Music spoke for him. Every emotion he wasn't allowed to express poured out through his hands. Anger became sharp, fast notes. Sadness turned into slow, aching chords. Hope sounded fragile, almost afraid to exist. He played when no one was watching. He played until his fingers hurt. He played until the silence inside him felt less heavy. But the world didn't care about silent boys who played broken pianos. At school, Elias was the kid teachers felt sorry for but never expected much from. Group projects excluded him. Class presentations skipped over him. When other kids talked about dreams of being famous singers or athletes, Elias kept his eyes on his desk, knowing those dreams weren't meant for someone like him. His mother was the only person who never treated his silence as weakness. She worked 2 jobs, came home exhausted, hands rough and cracked, but every night she sat beside him while he played. She never rushed him, never looked at her phone. She watched his fingers move like they were telling her secrets she already understood. When Elias was 15, she collapsed at work. The hospital room was quiet in a way that felt cruel. Machines beeped softly. Doctors spoke in careful tones. A heart condition. Years undetected. Too late. Elias sat beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers, desperately wishing that for once in his life, he could scream. She smiled at him, weak but peaceful, and placed his hand over his chest, right above his heart. Then she moved his fingers, tapping a rhythm only the two of them understood. Music, she mouthed. Those were the last words she ever formed for him. After she died, the world grew unbearably loud and unbearably empty at the same time. Bills piled up. The apartment felt too big. The piano at the community center was sold. Elias stopped playing. Silence swallowed everything again, until a social worker handed him a flyer. A talent competition, open auditions, no age limit, no entry fee. Elias stared at the paper for a long time. He knew the show. Everyone did. The judges were ruthless, the audience unforgiving, and contestants who failed didn't just lose. They became jokes, memes, clips that lived forever online. A mute boy walking onto that stage would be eaten alive, but that night, he dreamed of his mother sitting beside a grand piano, nodding slowly, encouraging him without words. So he signed up. On audition day, Elias waited for hours. People around him warmed up their voices, stretched, joked nervously. Some glanced at him and then away, unsure how to interact. When his number was called, a producer knelt in front of him and spoke slowly, loudly, as if silence meant stupidity. "Can you perform?" Elias nodded and held up a small card he had written on. "I will play the piano." The producer hesitated. "You know the judges usually want a backstory." Elias handed him another card. "The music is my voice." When Elias walked onto the stage, the lights blinded him. The audience buzzed with curiosity that quickly shifted into confusion. 4 judges stared back at him. Simon Cowell leaned forward slightly, eyebrow raised. "So," Simon said, glancing at the cue card, "you're not going to sing." Elias shook his head. "And you're not going to talk." Another shake. A ripple of uncertainty moved through the room. Cameras zoomed in. Someone in the audience laughed awkwardly. Simon sighed, already skeptical. "All right then, Surprise us. A stagehand rolled out a piano. Elias sat down, hands hovering over the keys. For a moment, fear nearly won. He could feel the weight of millions of expectations pressing down on him. He could feel every insult he'd ever swallowed, every moment he'd been ignored. Then he closed his eyes. And he played. The first notes were soft, fragile, like a child learning how to breathe. The room quieted, confused by the gentleness. Elias's fingers trembled at first, then steadied. The melody grew richer, deeper. It carried grief, longing, anger, and something else beneath it all. Hope, stubborn and unkillable. The music told a story no words could hold. It spoke of loneliness so deep it echoed. Of love lost too early. Of a boy screaming into silence and refusing to disappear. Every note felt like a confession. Every chord like a wound opening and healing at the same time. The audience leaned forward without realizing it. One judge wiped her eyes. Another sat perfectly still, afraid to break the moment. Simon, known for his brutal honesty, stopped fidgeting entirely. His face changed, skepticism melting into something dangerously close to awe. Halfway through the performance, Elias introduced a new melody. Softer, familiar, a lullaby his mother used to hum while tapping his fingers. The notes wavered, almost breaking, but he pushed through, pouring everything he had left into the keys. By the time the final note faded, the silence was absolute. No clapping, no cheering, just breath held in collective disbelief. Then Simon Cowell stood up. The sound of the golden buzzer exploded through the theater like a heartbeat returning to life. Confetti did not fall. Music did not play. All anyone could hear was the roar of an audience rising to its feet, crying, screaming, applauding like they were trying to give something back they had taken for granted. Elias stayed seated, stunned, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in his life, the world had listened. Simon walked onto the stage, breaking protocol, kneeling beside the piano. He didn't speak at first. He simply placed a hand over his heart. "I've judged thousands of performances," Simon said softly. "And tonight, you reminded us why we're here. You didn't need words. You made us feel everything." Elias pressed his trembling hand to the keys and then to his chest, nodding. Backstage, producers whispered about viral clips, record-breaking views, headlines that would spread across the world. But none of that mattered to Elias. What mattered was the feeling that followed him off stage, light and warm and unfamiliar. Belonging. In the weeks that followed, Elias became more than a contestant. He became a symbol. Messages poured in from people who had felt unseen, unheard, underestimated. Parents of children with disabilities. Adults who had lost their voices to trauma. Artists who had been told they weren't enough. Elias never spoke, but he answered every message the same way. With music. When he returned to the stage for the finals, he played not just for himself, not just for his mother, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. And when he won, lifting the trophy with shaking hands, he looked up into the lights and imagined his mother smiling, tapping the rhythm over her heart.